The mahogany conference table had never felt so cold beneath my palms. Around me, the familiar faces of my family wore expressions I'd never seen before, calculated, determined, almost predatory. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Chicago headquarters, casting long shadows across the room, where I'd spent countless hours building what we all thought was our shared dream. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The motion to remove Marcus Thompson from all operational roles within Thompson Logistics passes by majority vote. My older brother Daniel announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just seized control of a $50 million company. He didn't even look at me as he spoke, his eyes fixed on the legal documents spread before him like a battle plan. My sister Jessica leaned back in her leather chair, arms crossed, wearing that satisfied smirk she'd perfected in high school when she'd gotten away with something. "Finally," she said, her voice dripping with relief. "We can run this company the way it should be run. Professionally." The word hit me like a physical blow. 22 years I'd given to this business. 22 years of 16-hour days, missed holidays, sacrificed relationships, all in service of building Thompson Logistics from a single warehouse operation into one of the most efficient supply chain networks in the Midwest. And now they were calling my leadership unprofessional. "Marcus," my youngest brother Ryan spoke up, his tone attempting diplomacy but failing to hide his excitement. "You have to understand, this isn't personal, it's just business." The board felt it was time for fresh leadership, new perspectives. Fresh leadership, as if the three of them had ever spent a single night in our warehouses, had ever negotiated with a supplier at 2 a.m. when a shipment was delayed, had ever personally driven a truck to ensure a client's deadline was met. They'd gotten their MBA degrees, and suddenly thought they understood logistics better than someone who'd lived and breathed it for over 2 decades. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You have no idea what you're doing." Daniel finally looked up, his face hard. "We know exactly what we're doing. You've been holding this company back with your old-school methods, your personal relationships with suppliers, your refusal to modernize. We're in the 21st century, Marcus. It's time to act like it. Old-school method, personal relationships. These weren't weaknesses, they were the foundation of everything we'd built." But I could see there was no point in arguing. The decision had been made long before I'd walked into this room. The three of them had been planning this coup for months, maybe years. "What about Dad's wishes?" I asked, playing my last card. "He wanted us to run this together. Dad's dead," Jessica said bluntly. "And his 40% stake got divided equally among the 4 of us when he passed. That means we each have 10%. And the 3 of us together have we're the majority now." The cold calculation in her voice was breathtaking. Our father had been gone for just 8 months, and she was already using his death as a business strategy. But she was right about the math. When Dad died, his controlling stake had been split equally among his 4 children, leaving no one with majority control, except when 3 of them decided to gang up on the 4. "Your final paycheck will be processed through normal channels," Ryan added, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "We'll also honor your vacation time and provide the standard severance package." Standard severance package. For the person who'd built their entire operation from the ground up, for the person who'd mortgaged his own house to keep the company afloat during the 2008 recession while they were still in college, for the person who'd sacrificed everything to create their golden goose. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. 2 weeks severance pay. Health insurance continued for 60 days. A non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in logistics anywhere in the tri-state area for 2 years. They'd thought of everything. "There's also this," Daniel said, producing another document. "A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You'll notice it covers all client relationships, supplier contracts, and operational procedures. We can't have you taking our trade secrets to competitors." Trade secret. As if I was some disgruntled employee who might spill company secrets, rather than the person who'd created most of those secrets in the first place. But I signed it anyway, my hand moving automatically while my mind raced through the implications of what they'd just done. "We'll need your access cards, company phone, and laptop," Jessica said, extending her hand with barely concealed eagerness. "Security will escort you out once you've gathered your personal items." Security escort. In my own company, in the building where I'd spent more time than in my own home, where I'd built something from nothing while they'd been getting their degrees and learning theories that had no connection to the real world of supply chain management. I placed my keys and phone on the table, then closed my laptop and slid it across to them. "I'll need about an hour to clean out my office." "Actually," Ryan said, not meeting my eyes, "we've already had your personal items boxed up. They're waiting for you in the lobby." "We thought it would be cleaner this way." Clean. They'd gone through my office without me, decided what was mine and what belonged to the company, and packed up 22 years of my life into cardboard boxes. The framed photo of Dad and me breaking ground on our third warehouse, the industry awards we'd won, the thank you notes from clients whose impossible deadlines we'd somehow met, all of it reduced to boxes in a lobby. "Fine," I said, standing up. The chair I'd occupied for countless board meetings, strategy sessions, and crisis management conferences suddenly felt foreign, like it had never been mine at all. As I reached the door, Daniel called out one last time, "Marcus, just so we're clear, the non-compete is ironclad. Our lawyers made sure of that. You won't be able to work in logistics for 2 years, and you won't be able to start a competing business for 5 years. We've protected our investment." I turned back and looked at the three of them, my siblings, my partners, my betrayers, sitting in their expensive suits around the table where we'd once planned a future together. They looked so confident, so sure of their victory. They'd outmaneuvered me legally, financially, and politically. They had the votes, the lawyers, and the control. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "You've protected your investment very well." But as I walked out of that conference room for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. They'd been so focused on protecting their investment that they'd forgotten to ask the most important question: what exactly were they investing in? In the lobby, 3 cardboard boxes sat waiting for me, labeled with my name in Jessica's neat handwriting. 22 years of building an empire, reduced to items that could fit in the trunk of my car. As I carried them out to the parking lot, I pulled out my personal phone and made a single call. "Hello, this is Marcus Thompson. I'd like to schedule a meeting with all primary suppliers for Thompson Logistics." "Yes, all of them. Tomorrow if possible. There's something very important we need to discuss." My siblings thought they'd won. They'd celebrated their victory with champagne and congratulations, dividing up my responsibilities like conquerors splitting the spoils of war. But there was one tiny detail they'd overlooked in their rush to push me out. Every single supplier contract, every distribution agreement, every warehouse lease, all of it was tied to personal relationships I'd built over 2 decades. Relationships that existed not with Thompson Logistics, but with Marcus Thompson. They'd just kicked out the only person who could keep their supply chain running, and they had no idea what was coming next. The story of Thompson Logistics began in a cramped office above a diner on the south side of Chicago, where my father William Thompson had hung a hand-painted sign that read "Thompson Trucking, reliable delivery since." I was just 12 years old when I first climbed those narrow stairs, carrying a bag lunch and homework that would go unfinished because I was too fascinated by the world Dad was building. Back then, the entire operation consisted of 3 beat-up trucks, a single secretary named Martha, who worked 4 hours a day, and Dad's unwavering belief that treating people right was the foundation of any successful business. The office smelled like coffee and diesel fuel, and the walls were covered with road maps marked with delivery routes that Dad had drawn by hand. "Marcus," Dad would say, "anyone can move boxes from point A to point B. What matters is how you treat the people at both ends." While other kids my age were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, I was learning the names of every truck driver, every dispatcher, every warehouse worker who kept our small operation running. Dad made sure I understood that logistics wasn't just about moving products, It was about building relationships with real people who had families, dreams, and problems just like everyone else. My siblings had different priorities. Daniel was 4 years older and already focused on his college applications. He'd spent high school as student body president, debate team captain, and the kind of natural leader who everyone expected would run the family business someday. When he visited the office, he'd sit in Dad's chair and talk about scaling operations and market expansion, using terms he'd learned from business magazines. Jessica was 2 years older than me and had inherited Dad's natural charm, but she preferred using it at school social events rather than in the warehouse. She'd complain about the smell of diesel fuel and the rough language of the truck drivers, always eager to finish her required visits and get back to her friends. Ryan was 2 years younger and showed even less interest in the business. He'd rather spend his time with his computer, playing games or learning programming languages that seemed more relevant to the future than our old-fashioned trucking company. But for me, those Saturday mornings in the warehouse were better than any playground. I'd ride along on local deliveries, learning the layout of Chicago's industrial districts like other kids learned their neighborhood street. I memorized the names of shipping clerks at automotive plants, the preferences of receiving managers at furniture stores, and the schedules of dock workers at distribution centers. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. By the time I was 16, I could load a truck more efficiently than drivers with 10 years of experience. I knew which routes to avoid during rush hour, which customers always paid on time, and which suppliers could be counted on during emergencies. While my siblings were taking SAT prep courses, I was taking real-world lessons in supply chain management. "You've got a gift for this," Dad told me one evening, as we finished inventorying a shipment of appliances. "You understand how all the pieces fit together." It wasn't just understanding, it was passion. I loved the puzzle of coordinating dozens of moving parts, finding solutions when plans fell apart, building systems that turned chaos into efficiency. When a snowstorm shut down half of Chicago's roads, I was the one who found alternate routes and kept our deliveries on schedule. When a key supplier went out of business overnight, I was the one who had relationships with 3 backup vendors ready to step in. College was Dad's requirement, not my choice. He insisted all 4 of us needed degrees before we could officially join the business. "Times are changing," he'd say. "You need to understand both the old ways and the new ways." So I went to Northwestern, studied business administration, and spent 4 years learning theories about supply chain management from professors who'd never loaded a truck or negotiated with a factory foreman. My classmates were impressed by my practical knowledge, but I was frustrated by their abstract approach to problems that I'd been solving with my hands since I was 12. My siblings thrived in college. Daniel earned his MBA from Wharton and came back full of ideas about corporate restructuring and strategic partnerships. Jessica got her marketing degree from Northwestern and immediately started talking about rebranding and market positioning. Ryan studied information systems and wanted to automate everything through software solutions. But while they were learning theory, I was applying practice. Every summer break, every holiday, every weekend I could manage, I was back in the warehouse, back on the road, back to building relationships with the people who made our business possible. The transformation happened gradually. When I officially joined Thompson Logistics in 2001, we had 12 trucks and annual revenue of $2.3 million. Dad was ready to step back and let the next generation take over, but my siblings weren't ready to commit full-time. Daniel wanted to work for a consulting firm first to gain outside experience. Jessica had accepted a position with a marketing agency in downtown Chicago. Ryan was considering graduate school for computer science. So it was just me and Dad, working 18-hour days to keep up with demand that was growing faster than our capacity. The e-commerce boom was creating opportunities we'd never imagined, but it required a level of coordination and efficiency that our old systems couldn't handle. "We need to expand," Dad said one evening as we reviewed contracts that would double our business if we could figure out how to handle them. "But I'm too old to start over, and your brothers and sister aren't ready." "Then it's up to us," I replied, already mentally mapping out a plan that would require 15 new trucks, 2 additional warehouses, and partnerships with suppliers across the Midwest. That's when I discovered my real talent wasn't just for logistics, it was for building the kind of relationships that could support rapid growth. While other companies competed on price alone, I focused on reliability, communication, and personal service. I learned the names of warehouse managers' kids, remembered suppliers' birthdays, and showed up personally when problems needed solving. When auto tech industries needed emergency parts delivery for their assembly line, I didn't just send a truck, I drove there myself to ensure everything arrived on time. When Midwest Furniture was struggling with damaged shipments, I didn't just file insurance claims, I redesigned their packaging process and trained their loading crews. By 2005, Thomson Logistics had grown to 45 trucks and $12 million in annual revenue. Dad was talking about retirement. Proud of what we'd built together. But I was just getting started. The key breakthrough came when I realized that true supply chain control wasn't about owning trucks or warehouses, it was about becoming indispensable to the people who made decisions. Every supplier relationship I built, every warehouse manager I befriended, every transportation coordinator I helped solve problems for, became part of a network that extended far beyond our company. I wasn't just Marcus Thompson, operations manager. I was the guy who could make impossible deadlines happen, who could find solutions when everyone else saw only problems, who could be trusted with the most critical shipments because I'd never let anyone down. When Dad passed away in 2015, my siblings finally came home to claim their inheritance. They'd spent years building careers in other industries, learning skills that looked impressive on paper, but had no connection to the daily realities of supply chain management. They thought they were inheriting a trucking company. They had no idea they were inheriting a network of relationships that existed entirely because of Marcus Thompson, relationships that could disappear just as easily as they'd been created. But that understanding would come later. First, they had to learn what happens when you kick out the person who built everything you think you own. The first crack in our family unity appeared during the quarterly board meeting in March 2016. Just 3 months after Dad's funeral. I was presenting our Q1 performance numbers, a 23% increase in revenue despite losing our largest client to a competitor, when Daniel interrupted me mid-sentence. Marcus, these operational details are fine for internal reports, but we need to focus on strategic initiatives, he said, tapping his pen against his leather portfolio. Jessica and I have been developing a comprehensive rebranding campaign that could position us for national expansion. I paused, looking around the conference table at my 3 siblings. Strategic initiatives won't matter if we can't deliver on our current contracts. We're already operating at 97% capacity, and summer shipping season. That's exactly the problem, Jessica interjected, pulling out a glossy presentation folder. We're thinking too small. Look at companies like FedEx and UPS. They didn't get where they are by worrying about individual truck capacity. The presentation she laid out was professionally designed, full of charts and market analysis that looked impressive but had no connection to our actual business. She'd hired an outside consulting firm to develop a 5-year expansion plan that called for immediate investment in brand modernization and market penetration strategies. This is a $180,000 marketing budget, I said, flipping through pages of proposed logo designs and advertising campaigns. That's more than our entire profit margin for Q1. You have to spend money to make money. Ryan added, finally looking up from his laptop where he'd been coding throughout most of my presentation. I've been analyzing our digital infrastructure, and frankly, it's embarrassing. Our website looks like it was designed in 1995. Our tracking system is completely outdated, and we don't even have a mobile app. They weren't wrong about our technology being behind the times. I'd been focused on operational efficiency and relationship building rather than digital innovation. But they were proposing solutions without understanding the problems. Our clients don't choose us because of our website, I explained. Auto Tech has been with us for 8 years because when their production line went down in 2012, I personally drove replacement parts from Detroit at 2 a.m. Midwest Furniture stayed with us because when their shipment got damaged in that warehouse fire, I had replacement inventory delivered within 6 hours. That's exactly what we're talking about, Daniel said with the patronizing tone he'd perfected in business school. You're managing this company like it's still 1987. We need systematic solutions, not heroic individual efforts. Systematic solutions. As if the logistics industry ran on algorithms rather than relationships. As if the warehouse manager at Great Lakes Manufacturing cared about our mobile app when his loading dock was flooded and needed emergency rerouting. As if the purchasing director at Chicago Electronics would choose us because of our rebranding campaign rather than because I'd never missed a delivery deadline in 5 years. The pattern became clear over the following months. Every solution I proposed was dismissed as old-fashioned or not scalable. When I suggested expanding our local driver network to handle increased demand, Daniel countered with a proposal to lease space in an automated distribution center. When I recommended hiring 2 additional dispatchers who understood our client relationships, Jessica insisted we needed to invest in customer relationship management software instead. The breaking point came during our contract negotiations with Pinnacle Electronics, our second largest client. I'd been working with their supply chain director, Maria Santos, for over 7 years. We'd developed a customized delivery system that reduced their inventory costs by 15%, while maintaining 99.8% on-time delivery rates. Marcus, we love working with you personally, Maria told me during what should have been a routine contract renewal meeting. But we've been getting calls from your siblings about modernizing our partnership and implementing new digital solutions. They want to completely overhaul our current system. I hadn't known about any calls. When I confronted Daniel about it afterward, he was unapologetic. We can't have one person controlling our entire client relationship, he said. What happens if you get sick? What if you decide to take a vacation? We need systematic processes that don't depend on individual personalities. Maria Santos has been our client for 7 years because she trusts me, I replied. You can't replace that with a process. We can, and we will, Jessica added. We've already hired a client services manager who'll be taking over primary relationships with all major accounts. You'll transition to a more strategic role focused on operational oversight. Strategic role. Operational oversight. Corporate buzzwords that meant they wanted to remove me from the day-to-day relationships that actually drove our business. They'd hired Amanda Foster, a former account manager from a large logistics corporation, to professionalize our client interactions. Amanda's approach was everything my siblings had wanted: systematic, process-driven, and completely disconnected from the personal relationships that made our business work. She scheduled quarterly business reviews instead of the weekly check-ins I'd been doing. She implemented formal communication protocols that required all client requests to go through a ticketing system. She created standardized service agreements that eliminated the flexibility that had made us valuable to our clients. Within 2 months, we'd lost 3 smaller clients who complained about bureaucratic red tape and impersonal service. When I brought this to my siblings' attention, they dismissed it as normal churn during a transition period. Growing pains, Ryan said dismissively. These clients weren't profitable anyway. We need to focus on landing bigger fish. Bigger fish? As if the automotive parts manufacturer we'd been serving for 6 years wasn't important, because their monthly volume was only $45,000 instead of $100,000. As if the family-owned restaurant chain that had trusted us with their produce deliveries for 4 years didn't matter because they weren't Fortune 500. The final insult came during our annual performance reviews in December 2022. Despite Thomson Logistics having its most profitable year in company history, largely due new contracts I'd secured through my supplier relationships, my siblings had decided my compensation needed to be restructured. We're implementing a more equitable pay scale, Daniel announced, sliding a new contract across the table. Everyone will be compensated based on their formal responsibilities and educational qualifications. The new structure reduced my salary by 30% while increasing my siblings' compensation packages. Despite the fact that I was working 70-hour weeks while they rarely spent more than 40 hours in the office. Despite the fact that our biggest clients specifically requested to work with me personally. Despite the fact that I generated more new business in the past year than the 3 of them combined. This is about fairness. Jessica explained when I questioned the logic. We all have the same ownership stake in the company, so we should all have similar compensation levels. Similar compensation levels for vastly different contributions. Daniel spent most of his time in strategic planning meetings that produced elaborate PowerPoint presentations, but no actual results. Jessica focused on marketing initiatives that looked impressive but generated no measurable increase in business. Ryan worked on technology upgrades that solved problems we didn't have while ignoring the operational challenges we faced every day. But according to their new corporate structure, my 2 decades of relationship building and operational expertise were worth less than their MBA degrees and theoretical knowledge. The most painful moment came during a crisis in January 2023, when a massive ice storm shut down transportation across the entire Midwest. While my siblings held emergency meetings to discuss risk management protocols and crisis communication strategies, I was on the phone with suppliers and drivers personally coordinating alternative routes and emergency deliveries. I worked for 36 straight hours catching naps in my office between calls, making sure every critical shipment reached its destination despite impossible conditions. By the time the storm cleared, we'd maintained our delivery commitments, while our competitors were explaining to their clients why their products were stuck in warehouses. The thank you notes and phone calls poured in for weeks afterward. Clients praising our reliability, suppliers expressing gratitude for our partnership, drivers proud to work for a company that cared about getting the job done. But at our next board meeting, Daniel's only comment was, "This kind of crisis management reinforces why we need better systematic planning. We can't rely on individual heroics to solve operational problems." Individual heroics, 22 years of building relationships, solving problems and delivering results reduced to individual heroics that needed to be systematized away. They'd made their position clear. Marcus Thompson, the person who'd built their business, was nothing more than an obstacle to their vision of corporate professionalism. They had no idea that their vision was about to become their nightmare. The revelation came to me on a cold Tuesday morning, in November 2022, 6 months before my siblings would execute their coup. I was sitting in Tony Castellano's office at Midwest Steel Distribution, discussing our quarterly contract renewal, when he said something that would change everything. "You know, Marcus, I've been in this business for 35 years, and I've never seen anything like what you've built," Tony said, leaning back in his weathered chair. "Most logistics companies come and go, but you've created something different. It's not Thompson Logistics that we trust. It's you personally." The words hit me like lightning. Tony wasn't just being polite or sentimental. He was stating a fundamental truth about how our entire operation actually worked. Every supplier relationship, every warehouse partnership, every distribution agreement we had wasn't really tied to Thompson Logistics as a corporate entity. They were tied to Marcus Thompson as an individual. I started thinking back through every major contract we held. Autotech Industries, their procurement director James Mitchell, had specifically insisted that I be designated as the primary point of contact in their service agreement. Great Lakes Manufacturing had a clause in their contract requiring that Marcus Thompson personally approve any changes to their delivery protocols. Chicago Electronics had negotiated a provision that if I ever left the company, they had the right to terminate their agreement with 30 days' notice. But it went deeper than just contractual language. Over 22 years, I hadn't just built business relationships. I'd built a personal network that extended across every aspect of our supply chain. When drivers needed time off for family emergencies, they called me directly. When warehouse managers had loading problems, they texted my personal phone. When suppliers had inventory issues, they reached out to Marcus Thompson, not Thompson Logistics. That afternoon, I drove to see Carmen Rodriguez, who managed the largest warehouse complex on Chicago's South Side. Carmen controlled storage and distribution for over 40 companies, including 8 of our major clients. We'd worked together for 12 years, ever since I'd helped her navigate a computer system crash that could have shut down her entire operation. "Carmen, I need to ask you something confidential," I said as we walked through her spotless facility. "If something happened to me tomorrow, if I left Thompson Logistics, what would happen to our arrangements here?" She stopped walking and looked at me seriously. "Marcus, You know the answer to that. Every agreement we have specifies you as the authorized representative. Without your signature, Thomson Logistics has no access to our facilities, no warehouse space, no distribution rights. But more than that, she paused, choosing her words carefully. This business runs on trust. I trust you. My staff trusts you. If you're not involved, we'd have to completely reevaluate every arrangement. I spent the next 3 weeks conducting similar conversations across our entire network. What I discovered was staggering. Not only were most of our supplier relationships tied to me personally, but I'd inadvertently created a web of interdependence that made Marcus Thompson absolutely essential to Thomson Logistics' continued operation. Take our relationship with Precision Parts Manufacturing. Our biggest supplier, their factory manager, Steve Kowalski, had been burned by unreliable logistics companies before we started working together 8 years ago. He'd insisted on a unique arrangement. Thomson Logistics got preferred pricing and priority shipping, but only on orders personally authorized by Marcus Thompson. Steve had learned to trust my judgment about delivery schedules and inventory management, and he'd structured our entire agreement around that personal relationship. The pattern repeated everywhere I looked. Riverside Trucking, which provided our overflow capacity during peak seasons, had a contract that required my personal approval for any Thomson Logistics shipments over 5,000 pounds. Great Lakes Warehousing gave us discounted storage rates because I'd helped them design their new inventory management system, but their agreement specifically stated that the discount was contingent on my continued involvement in logistics planning. Even our technology infrastructure was more dependent on me than my siblings realized. When Ryan had pushed for upgrading our tracking systems, I'd personally negotiated with Dataflow Solutions to integrate their software with our existing processes. The contract included unlimited technical support, but only for issues escalated through Marcus Thompson as the designated technical liaison. But the most important discovery was about our driver network. Thomson Logistics owned 47 trucks, but during peak seasons we regularly coordinated shipments using over 100 independent drivers and small trucking companies. These relationships had developed organically over 2 decades, built on mutual respect and personal trust. Miguel Santos, who ran a family trucking business with 12 drivers, put it best. Marcus, you've never let us down. When you call with emergency runs, we drop everything because we know you'll make it worth our while. When we have truck problems, you help us find temporary replacements. When other companies stiff us on payments, you make sure we get paid within 48 hours. We don't work for Thomson Logistics. We work for you. The realization was both exciting and terrifying. I hadn't just built a logistics company, I'd created an entire ecosystem of relationships that functioned because Marcus Thompson was at the center of it. Remove me from the equation and the whole system would collapse like a house of cards. My siblings had no idea. To them, these were just vendor relationships, managed through contracts and purchase orders. They saw suppliers as interchangeable resources that could be managed through their new systematic processes. They had no understanding that 22 years of personal relationship building had created something that couldn't be replicated or replaced. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I met with my lawyer, Patricia Walsh, to update my will following Dad's death. As we reviewed my assets, she made an observation that crystallized everything. Marcus, looking at these business relationships, I have to ask, have you ever considered that you might be personally liable if Thomson Logistics breaches any of these supplier agreements? I hadn't considered it, but as Patricia explained, the legal implications, I realized she was absolutely right. Because so many contracts named me personally as the authorized representative, and because I'd provided personal guarantees for several credit arrangements, my individual liability was enormous. But more importantly, it meant that these relationships belonged to me, not to Thomson Logistics. What would happen if I wanted to transfer these relationships to a new company? I asked. Patricia smiled. That's the beauty of personal service contracts. As long as you fulfill your obligations, you can generally assign your business relationships to any entity you choose. The question is whether Thomson Logistics could continue operating without them. That night, I sat in my home office and mapped out the entire Thomson Logistics supply chain. Every supplier, every warehouse, every trucking partner, every technology vendor. I drew lines connecting each relationship to either the company or to me personally. When I finished, the picture was clear. Thomson Logistics owned trucks, equipment, and office space. But Marcus Thompson controlled the relationships that made those assets profitable. My siblings thought they were inheriting a logistics company. In reality, they were inheriting an empty shell that would cease to function the moment I was no longer involved. The irony was perfect. In their rush to modernize and systematize everything, they'd never bothered to understand what actually made our business work. They'd spent years dismissing my old-fashioned relationship-based approach while building their entire future on a foundation they didn't even know existed. They wanted to kick me out and replace me with systematic processes and professional management, but they couldn't replace 22 years of personal trust, individual relationships, and mutual respect with corporate procedures and software solutions. I had the ultimate trump card, and they had no idea I was holding it. The only question now was how to play it. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Chicago feel alive with possibility. While my siblings were probably celebrating their victory with expensive coffee and self-congratulatory emails, I was already 3 hours into executing the most comprehensive supply chain disruption in Thomson Logistics history. My first call had been to Tony Castellano at Midwest Steel Distribution at exactly 6 a.m., knowing he always arrived early to review overnight orders. "Tony, it's Marcus. I need to inform you that my employment with Thomson Logistics has been terminated, effective immediately, as per Section 4.3 of our supplier agreement. This automatically voids our current contract and requires immediate cessation of all deliveries." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Tony responded. "Jesus, Marcus. What happened? And what does this mean for the Autotech shipment scheduled for this afternoon?" "The Autotech shipment will need to be canceled," I said calmly. "Thomson Logistics no longer has authorized access to your inventory or distribution services. But we've got $85,000 worth of specialized steel components sitting in our warehouse waiting for pickup. Autotech's production line goes down tomorrow if they don't get these parts." "I understand the situation, Tony. Unfortunately, my siblings decided they could run the company without me. They're about to learn what that actually means." By 7 a.m., I'd made identical calls to 17 major suppliers. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock, disbelief, and growing panic as they realized the implications. Precision Parts Manufacturing had 3 truckloads ready for pickup. Great Lakes Warehousing was holding inventory for 8 different Thomson Logistics clients. Riverside Chemical had time-sensitive materials that would expire if not delivered within 48 hours. The beautiful thing about personal service contracts is that they work both ways. Just as these suppliers had trusted me enough to offer preferential terms and priority service, they were now legally obligated to honor the termination clauses I'd insisted on including. No Marcus Thompson signature meant no Thomson Logistics access. My phone started ringing at 7:23 a.m. Daniel's number flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times in the next 10 minutes, each call going straight to my message system. At 7:45, I made my most important call of the day. "Carmen, it's Marcus. I wanted to personally notify you that Thomson Logistics will no longer have access to your warehouse facilities as of today." Carmen Rodriguez had been expecting this call since our conversation 3 weeks earlier. "How much time do they have to remove their stored inventory?" "According to our agreement, 72 hours for emergency retrieval, but only with my personal authorization," I replied. "Since I'm no longer employed by Thomson Logistics, I can't provide that authorization." "So they're locked out completely?" "Completely. 47,000 square feet of stored inventory, including the entire holiday season merchandise for 3 major retail clients, all inaccessible until they find alternative storage and transportation." The domino effect was already accelerating. Without access to Carmen's warehouse complex, Thomson Logistics couldn't fulfill orders for Chicago Electronics, Midwest Furniture, or Premium Home Goods. Without Midwest steel distribution, they couldn't supply Autotech Industries. Without precision parts manufacturing, their entire automotive supply chain would collapse within days. But I wasn't finished. My next series of calls targeted our independent trucking network. Miguel Santos was first on the list. Miguel, I've been terminated from Thomson Logistics. I wanted to let you know personally before you heard it from someone else. Terminated? Marcus, what are you talking about? You are Thomson Logistics. Not according to my siblings. They voted me out yesterday. Effective immediately. Those idiots. What does this mean for us? It means any loads you're carrying for Thomson Logistics need to be delivered to your own holding facility instead of their destinations. Our insurance and liability agreements were structured through my personal bonding, which terminated with my employment. Miguel was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Marcus, we've got 6 trucks on the road right now carrying Thomson Logistics shipments. If we can't deliver them, you'll need to secure the cargo until alternative arrangements can be made. I know it's inconvenient, but I can't authorize deliveries for a company that just fired me. Within 2 hours, I'd contacted 43 independent drivers and small trucking companies. The message was consistent. Marcus Thomson was no longer associated with Thomson Logistics, which meant all existing agreements were void and all current shipments needed to be secured pending new arrangements. The technology infrastructure was next. I called Dataflow Solutions and spoke directly with their CEO, Richard Chen, who'd personally negotiated our software integration contract. Richard, I need to notify you that my employment with Thomson Logistics has ended. As the designated technical liaison, I'm formally requesting immediate suspension of all system access pending contract renegotiation. Marcus, you designed half of their tracking system integration. Without that access, they can't monitor shipments, update delivery schedules, or communicate with drivers. I understand. Unfortunately, they decided they could modernize their operations without me. This seems like a good opportunity for them to implement those systematic solutions they've been planning. By 10 a.m., Thomson Logistics had lost access to their primary tracking system, their inventory management platform, and their customer communication portal. Every truck in their fleet was suddenly operating blind, unable to receive updated routing information or report delivery status. The final stroke was the most devastating. I called every major client we served and delivered the same carefully worded message. This is Marcus Thomson calling to inform you that my employment with Thomson Logistics has been terminated. Per the terms of our service agreement, this constitutes a material change in service delivery that triggers the relationship modification clause. I wanted to give you personal notice before any disruptions occur. James Mitchell, at Autotech Industries, was the first to fully grasp the implications. Marcus, our contract specifically requires your personal oversight of all deliveries. If you're not there, then Thomson Logistics is in breach of contract, and you have grounds for immediate termination with no penalty. But we have $340,000 worth of critical components in transit right now. Our assembly line shuts down Friday if those parts don't arrive. I understand your concern, James. Unfortunately, that's no longer my responsibility. You might want to contact my former siblings to discuss alternative arrangements. The phone calls from Thomson Logistics started coming fast and furious after that. Daniel first, his voice tight with controlled panic. Marcus, what the hell are you doing? Half our suppliers are saying they can't deliver orders today. I'm not doing anything, Daniel. I'm unemployed. Remember, what my former suppliers choose to do is entirely up to them. This is sabotage. You're deliberately trying to destroy the company. I'm simply notifying our business partners about my change in employment status. I thought you'd appreciate the professional courtesy. Jessica called 20 minutes later. Her marketing sophistication completely abandoned. Marcus, you have to fix this. Midwest Furniture is threatening to cancel their entire holiday contract. I'm sure Amanda Foster can handle the client relationship, I replied calmly. Isn't that why you hired her? To professionalize our customer service? Amanda doesn't understand their technical requirements. She doesn't know which warehouse they use or how their delivery schedule works. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before deciding my knowledge wasn't valuable. Ryan's call came an hour later, panic evident in his voice. Marcus, our entire computer system is down. We can't track shipments. We can't communicate with drivers. We can't even access our client database. That sounds like a technology problem, Ryan. Isn't that your area of expertise? I'm sure you can implement one of those systematic solutions you've been planning. This isn't funny. We've got 67 trucks on the road and no way to coordinate with them. I'm not laughing, Ryan. I'm simply no longer employed by Thomson Logistics, which means I can't authorize access to systems that require my personal liaison status. By noon, Thomson Logistics was in complete chaos. Suppliers refusing to release inventory, warehouses denying access to stored merchandise, independent truckers securing cargo instead of delivering it. Technology systems are locked down, major clients threatening contract cancellation, and sitting in my quiet home office, I was fielding a different kind of phone call entirely. Marcus, this is Patricia Walsh. I've been contacted by 3 separate companies asking if you're available for consulting work. Apparently, word is spreading quickly about your availability. What kind of consulting work? Full-service supply chain management. It seems several of Thomson Logistics' competitors are very interested in hiring someone with your particular expertise and relationship network. I smiled, looking out my window at the Chicago skyline where my former company was probably holding emergency meetings and making increasingly desperate phone calls. Tell them I'm taking meetings starting Monday. But first, I expect to hear from 3 specific people who owe me some very sincere apologies. The counterattack was complete. Thomson Logistics had wanted to fire Marcus Thompson and replace him with systematic processes. Now they were about to discover that some systems can't be replaced, they can only be destroyed. The knock on my door came at 8:47 p.m. on Thursday, exactly 30 hours after I'd walked out of Thomson Logistics for what my siblings thought was the last time. Through the window, I could see Daniel's Mercedes parked in my driveway, engine still running as if he might need to make a quick escape. I opened the door to find all 3 of my siblings standing on my porch, looking like they'd aged 5 years in the past day and a half. Daniel's usually perfect hair was disheveled, Jessica's designer suit was wrinkled, and Ryan looked like he hadn't slept since Tuesday. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice stripped of its usual executive authority. I stepped aside and let them into my living room, the same room where we'd played as children, where Dad had taught us card games and life lessons, where we'd planned our futures around a family business that was supposed to unite us forever. "Coffee?" I offered, playing the gracious host. "Cut the act, Marcus," Jessica snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "Please. We're in serious trouble." I settled into Dad's old recliner, while they arranged themselves awkwardly on the couch like supplicants before a king. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. "How serious?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ryan pulled out his laptop and started reading numbers that painted a picture of complete corporate collapse. "We've lost access to $2.3 million in stored inventory. 47 trucks are sitting idle because drivers can't receive routing instructions. Autotech is threatening a $500,000 penalty clause for missed deliveries. Chicago Electronics has already terminated their contract. Midwest Furniture is demanding immediate replacement of a $180,000 in holiday merchandise that's locked in warehouses we can't access. Our bank called this afternoon," Daniel added, his voice hollow. "They're concerned about our ability to service the equipment loans without operational revenue. If we can't demonstrate stable cash flow by Monday, they're calling the notes." "How much?" I asked. $3.12 million in total debt," Jessica whispered. "The expansion loans, the truck financing, the warehouse mortgages. Everything comes due if we're in default." I let the silence stretch while they absorbed the full magnitude of their situation. Thomson Logistics, the company they'd been so eager to control, was less than a week away from total bankruptcy. The systematic processes they'd wanted to implement couldn't save them if there was no system left to process. "There's more," Ryan continued, his voice barely audible. "We've been getting calls from competitors all day, They're offering to hire our drivers, lease our warehouse space, even buy our client contracts at pennies on the dollar. Word is out that Thompson Logistics is finished. And the clients? I asked, though I could guess. Panic, Daniel admitted. Autotech's production lines shut down this morning. They're scrambling to find emergency suppliers, but no one else has the relationships you built with the specialty steel distributors. Chicago Electronics is talking about suing us for breach of contract. Premium Home Goods says their entire holiday season is ruined. The beautiful thing about nuclear options is that they create perfect clarity. My siblings finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them for years. In the logistics business, relationships weren't just valuable. They were everything. All their talk about systematic processes and professional management meant nothing when the people who actually moved the products refused to work with them. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "We want you to come back," Daniel said immediately. "Full partnership, equal decision-making authority, whatever compensation you think is fair." "That's not going to work," I replied calmly. "You've demonstrated that you don't value my contributions. The moment this crisis passes, you'll go back to treating me like an obstacle to your corporate vision." "Then what?" Jessica asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "What do you want?" I'd been thinking about this moment for months, planning for every possible scenario. The answer was simple, elegant, and completely fair. "I want to buy you out," I said. "All three of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's laptop slipped from his hands. Jessica's mouth opened but no sound came out. Daniel stared at me like I'd suggested something impossible. "Buy us out?" Daniel finally managed. "Marcus, you don't have that kind of money." "Actually, I do." I pulled out my own folder of documents, prepared weeks ago when I'd first realized where this was heading. "I've been getting very interesting offers from Thompson Logistics competitors. Turns out, a supply chain expert with my particular network of relationships is extremely valuable." I slid the first document across the coffee table. "Pinnacle Logistics has offered me a $2 million signing bonus and 15% equity to join as Chief Operations Officer. Great Lakes Transportation wants to pay me $1.5 million annually, plus performance bonuses to build their Midwest division. Chicago Supply Chain Solutions is offering a partnership that would give me 40% ownership of a new company." Their faces went pale as they read the offer letters. These weren't just job opportunities, they were recognition of my true market value, the value my siblings had consistently refused to acknowledge. "But I don't want to work for someone else," I continued. "I want to own Thompson Logistics outright. I want to rebuild it the right way, honoring the relationships Dad taught me to value while implementing the improvements that actually make sense." I pulled out a second set of documents. "I'm prepared to offer each of you $400,000 for your 10% stake in the company. That's $1.2 million total, which is actually generous considering the company's current condition." "400,000? Jessica sputtered. "The company was valued at $8 million last year. Last year, the company had access to its supply chain," I replied. "Today, it's worth whatever someone will pay for 47 trucks and some office furniture. I'm offering you a way out that lets you walk away with cash instead of bankruptcy." Daniel was frantically calculating numbers on his phone. "Even if we accept your offer, that's only $1.2 million. You said the debt is $3.2 million. That's my problem to solve," I said. "I have relationships with lenders who understand what I've built here. More importantly, I can restore operational revenue within 48 hours of taking control." The truth was even simpler than that. Every supplier, warehouse manager, and trucking partner I'd called on Wednesday had asked the same question. When would Marcus Thompson be back in business? They weren't interested in working with Thompson Logistics without me, but they were very interested in working with me regardless of what company name was on the letterhead. "You're asking us to give up everything Dad built," Ryan said quietly. "Dad built a small trucking company," I corrected. "I built Thompson Logistics. And you just destroyed it because you thought you could replace me with PowerPoint presentations and management consultants." I stood up and walked to the window. looking out at the city where our drivers were probably sitting in truck stops, wondering if they'd have jobs tomorrow. Where warehouse workers were dealing with confused supervisors who didn't understand why shipments were being refused. Where clients were scrambling to find alternative solutions for supply chain problems they'd never had to worry about before. "Here's what happens if you refuse my offer," I said, turning back to face them. "Tomorrow morning, I sign with one of these competitors. By next week, I'll be running supply chain operations for Thomson Logistics' biggest rival, using all the relationships you taught me to value. Within 6 months, I'll have recreated everything we built here, except it won't have the Thomson name on it." Meanwhile, Thomson Logistics declares bankruptcy. The bank seizes the trucks and equipment. The remaining clients sue for breach of contract. And the three of you spend the next 5 years explaining to potential employers why you managed to destroy a profitable family business in less than a week. I sat back down and looked at each of them in turn. "Or you can accept my offer, walk away with enough money to start over, and let me rebuild what we had into something even better." The negotiation took 4 more hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. By 1 a.m. Friday morning, we'd agreed on terms: $450,000 each for their stakes, payable over 2 years, with the first payments due within 30 days of transfer completion. More importantly, they agreed to a complete non-compete clause that would prevent them from working in logistics for 5 years. Not because I was vindictive, but because I needed absolute assurance that they wouldn't interfere with the relationships I'd need to rebuild. Friday morning, I walked back into Thomson Logistics as its sole owner. The first call I made was to Tony Castellano at Midwest Steel Distribution. "Tony, it's Marcus. I'm back, and I'm ready to restore our supplier agreement immediately." "Thank God," he said with genuine relief. "I've got 3 clients asking when their orders will be processed. How fast can we get back to normal?" "Give me 48 hours to make all the calls. By Monday morning, it'll be like this week never happened." It took exactly 43 hours to restore full operations. Every supplier welcomed me back with relief and enthusiasm. Warehouse managers who'd spent 3 days fielding angry calls from confused clients were eager to resume normal procedures. Independent truckers who'd been securing cargo in holding facilities delivered everything within 24 hours of my authorization. The technology systems came back online with a single phone call to Richard Chen at Dataflow Solutions. "Marcus, we never doubted you'd be back. Your access codes are still active." Within a week, Thomson Logistics was not only back to normal operations, but thriving. The crisis had demonstrated to our clients just how valuable our services really were. Autotech signed an expanded contract with premium rates for guaranteed reliability. Chicago Electronics not only renewed but added 2 new product lines to our delivery schedule. Most satisfying of all, 3 competitors who'd been circling like vultures during our crisis week called to ask if I was interested in selling my client relationships. The same relationships my siblings had dismissed as old-fashioned and not scalable were suddenly worth millions to companies that understood their true value. 6 months later, Thomson Logistics reported its most profitable quarter in company history. We'd expanded to 75 trucks, added 3 new warehouse facilities, and established partnerships in 4 additional states. But more importantly, we'd done it all while maintaining the personal relationship approach that Dad had taught me and that I'd never stopped believing in. Daniel, Jessica, and Ryan used their buyout money to start separate careers far from the logistics industry. Daniel joined a consulting firm in New York. Jessica moved to Los Angeles to work for an advertising agency. Ryan took a programming job with a tech startup in Austin. I heard they were all doing well, and I genuinely hoped they found success in fields better suited to their talents and temperaments. They'd learned a hard lesson about the difference between managing a business and understanding it, between corporate leadership and industry expertise. But the most important lesson had been mine. Sometimes the quiet person in the corner, the one taking notes and solving problems, isn't just dangerous because they might leave. They're dangerous because they might stay. And when they do, they get to rewrite all the rules. Thomson Logistics thrived because Marcus Thomson understood something his siblings never learned. In business, as in life, relationships aren't just part of the system. Sometimes, they are the system. And the person who controls the relationships controls everything else. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you, right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.